You're watching Try jQuery, the return flight. I'm Greg Pollock, and in order to do this course, you need to have already played through Try jQuery, our previous course. So if you haven't, go do that, and then we'll get started in this level with some Ajax. Let's take a look at a typical web request without Ajax. So our web browser requests a URL from our server. Our server then sends a response which contains an HTML file and maybe some JavaScript files. Then our browser takes the HTML, loads that into our document object model, which we learned about in the previous course. Then our JavaScript gets executed, which may interact with the DOM. Now let's figure out how communication works with Ajax, which, by the way, stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. And it's basically a way for communicating with the web server without doing a full page refresh. So we already have our page loaded, and without refreshing the page, we can go and fetch more data from the server, and if we want, load that into the page dynamically. Here's our server and our browser again, and notice the browser has already loaded our web page into the DOM. But we want to get additional data from the server. So inside of our JavaScript, we do an Ajax request to the server. Our web server then returns an Ajax response, which could be HTML or another data format. Then our JavaScript can act on that response, perhaps interacting with the DOM and updating our web page. Now let's jump into an example where we can use some Ajax. This should look familiar. It's from Try jQuery. You can see here when we click on Flight Details, it gives us some details from the flight, and then when we click on View Boarding Pass, it gives us this image. Now, in our previous course, we loaded all this data into the page and just revealed it as we clicked on things. However, this time, let's wait to load those flight details until someone clicks that button, and then we'll go and fetch that from the server and load it into the page. Here's some of the code from that Try jQuery example. You can see we have a title, Hawaiian Vacation, a button, Flight Details, and then a div where we can click to view the boarding pass. But none of the data we need is loaded in there yet. Then we have some event handlers, so if someone clicks the button inside the confirmation class div, it will find the ticket and reveal it. Then we have another click handler that looks for the View Boarding Pass link, and if that gets clicked, it will show the boarding pass. So how would we load the ticket information inside that ticket div from the server when our button gets clicked? To do this, we're going to use the jQuery Ajax function, which requires a URL and has optionally a bunch of other settings, which we'll get to. Here's our Ajax call, and here's the URL which we want to call, confirmation.html. Our second argument is a JavaScript object, which contains one option called success. This is where we tell our browser what to do if a response gets successfully returned to this call. The response we're going to get back from the server, in this case, is going to be some HTML which looks like this. Notice this is not a full web page. This is just the HTML which we want to load into our ticket div. Now inside of our success callback, we're going to find the ticket, load the HTML that we got back from the server into it, and then reveal it by calling the slide down function. Before we see this Ajax call in action, let's simplify the URL we're calling. See, here we can specify a relative URL. That's because by default, this Ajax call will use the same domain that your browser has loaded. It's the same thing as doing this Ajax call you see down here. So if we jump into the browser and we click the Flight Details button, we can see that they get loaded using Ajax from the server and then displayed on the screen. You also might notice that on the bottom here we're using Chrome DevTools to actually see the Ajax request happen. This is really convenient. If you're not familiar with Chrome DevTools, Code School has a great course called Discover DevTools, which will teach you everything you need to know about it. There's another method for doing simple Ajax calls in jQuery, using the get method, which only takes two parameters, the URL and what to do when it gets back a successful response. So if we were to rewrite this request using the get function, it would look something like this. You might have noticed that every time we do this Ajax request, we're hitting the same URL, that same static confirmation.html file. But we like to create dynamic websites. How might we do a request that sends along the confirmation number? Something that looks like this, that appends the confirmation number to the URL. Well, of course, the easy solution here is simply to put that inside of the Ajax request and we'd be fine. However, there's a better way to do that in Ajax. This is where the Ajax data option comes in. This simply takes a JavaScript object of keys and values and adds that to the URL. So these two pieces of code are equivalent. Another way we can get the confirmation number is if we stored it inside of the HTML. So here you can see the ticket div, and we have an attribute called data_confnum that will store our confirmation number. Then inside of our Ajax call, we can use that data option and specify to pull the confirmation number out of that attribute. This, of course, still results in the same URL request from the previous slide. Now it's time for you to try some Ajax calls, and I'll see you in the next section.